Hello, everyone, and welcome to HR Options webinar series. My name is Amy Julian. I'm the Vice President here at HR Options. It's my pleasure to be your moderator for today's session, where I am joined by my colleague Clifford Stephan, founder of OneCompensation. And Clifford is going to share with us a range of information regarding compensation plans and strategies to help us attract and retain top talent. Before I pass the mic over to Clifford, I just want to touch base with you guys on a few of the features of the meeting room so you can better interact with us. I encourage you to ask questions, and to do that, you submit your questions in the Q&A box on your screen. We'll respond to all the questions at the end of the session. For those of you who are looking for the certificate for continuing education credits, or if you would like to print out the slide deck with an area and space for notes, all of those are in the resources window in the middle right side of your screen. We've also posted a couple of articles related to compensation and some additional information, so check that out. And lastly, you'll have an opportunity to complete a quick evaluation at the end of the session. If you have to leave early, please take a moment to complete the survey before you close, because your feedback is extremely valuable to us. It's a widget on the bottom of your screen that says evaluation. HR Options offers the webinar series. The whole reason we're doing this is because we do believe in value-added services. We support clients with outsourced HR support for part-time and project needs, and we're also an outsourced employer for those workers who you've identified that you want to use, but you just don't want to hire them directly. And we provide that service throughout the U.S. and Canada. You can download some additional information about our services in the resources box as well. And with that, we are ready to begin our presentation. It is my pleasure to introduce Clifford Stephan to you all. For years, Clifford has developed comprehensive and competitive compensation plans for companies in all types of industries, but primarily here in the Silicon Valley, and we all know how competitive it is to attract and keep talent in this area. Clifford focuses on attracting the right talent, keeping employees and leadership engaged, and promoting long-term growth for his clients. I know we're all eager to hear what you've got to say, so I'll turn the mic over to you right now, Clifford. Welcome.
Amy, thank you so much. Pleasure to be here, and I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak to your group and HR Options. So thank you kindly. Let's go ahead with that. I'll begin and get into a little bit about what we're talking today. Kind of a compensation 101 overview. I'll be kind of talking about a lot of areas that I see, and kind of with the common theme of how can we make things better at your company. It sounds a little squishy, but we are in human resources to help one another, and I think it's an important component, as a lot of you are HR leaders in your area or dealing closely with your people and teams, and it's always a very common and important theme, I think, to consider. With that, I wanted to go over a little bit of an overview of what we're going to be talking about today, and kind of really provide a little bit of an insider's perspective on what I'm seeing and the challenges I see in the workplace. I am engaging, as Amy mentioned, with a lot of different types of clients, and so I kind of have a broader perspective of some of the themes and trends, and also get into, at a high level, just some data points here about recent employer trends, give you an overview of, compensation planning and what we're doing and things you might think about trying to incorporate in your field, or maybe take a fresh look at, and then ultimately, again, I think we're trying to better ways to engage with your employees, and that can be done with all facets of human resources, and I think compensation is certainly a pretty critical one as well. with that, I wanted to get into, what Jennifer Lawrence taught me about compensation. And I'll have to back up a little bit here, but having my own practice and having a sales and marketing consultant telling me that I need to be a thought leader and I need to publish posts and I need to comment on the latest legislation. Back in January of this year, California passed some new legislation with California Fair Pay Act, and so I was needing to draft a post on LinkedIn about this latest kind of somewhat dull conversation, and at that same time, Sony's emails had been hacked, and a lot of dirty laundry came out, including that Jennifer Lawrence was actually paid less than her male cohorts in American Hustle, and that kind of inspired her to write an article. I think it was in the New York Times about that experience and how it felt. So it was kind of the intent of it was to be a little cheeky and try to bring attention to some of one of our many HR legislations that's out there, but to maybe make it a little bit more of a fun way. And it was really interesting. So I kind of got it out there, and again, I think we're all pretty busy in the Valley, and we're all spinning a lot of plates, and I think we can oftentimes lose sight of the human elements of pay and how that may impact your employees and how their self-perceptions and how they're valued, and it's pretty important. And I actually got a lot of feedback with readers that were nice enough to share some of their stories, and it kind of was actually somewhat jarring to kind of hear some of their stories. And again, I do think that it, for these people and, many others in this position, when they're at companies where they don't feel like there's a fair system in place or, any system in place, or this has clearly been neglected, I think it, not only does it wane in engagement, but a lot of, unfortunate behaviors occur where when you don't have a system in place, you're making a lot of one-off subjective decisions that can really impact, and make some of these employees question their worth every day. And, when employees perceive that they aren't being treated equitably, they can feel devalued and disaffected. And this was some of the feedback that I got from some of the readers that were nice enough to share it with me confidentially. And, these employees may not stick around long, and if they do, their unhappiness can rub off on others and really negatively impact your company's culture, morale, and brand. And as we all know, there's Glassdoor, and there's all kinds of social media out there, so it's not as closed book as it used to be. So it is something to think about and something that's important. But it was a little bit of a turning point for me because I'm managing this somewhat hectic consulting practice, and again, it's really easy for me to just kind of get into my projects and not really think about the human side. But this was actually a really nice way to redirect me on what it's like to kind of have fair and meaningful programs and what we're all kind of trying to do here as HR leaders. And, I kind of had that Jerry Maguire moment, and I actually, kind of wrote this manifesto. And I think, growing up in Silicon Valley my whole life, and definitely noticing, just a change in the competitiveness over the last, 4 or 5 years, and the traffic and the hirings and the haves and the have-nots between, different employer groups. Kind of like I said, it kind of inspired me to write this manifesto that's kind of a take on, what it's like to work and be employed here in Silicon Valley and the challenges that come with that. And what I was kind of seeing with some of my client experiences with the challenges of them, addressing some of these issues with, everything that needs to get done and all the shifting priorities and all those things. And so that's one of the articles that Amy mentioned is in there that I'm quite proud of. It's got over 1,000 views and likes, and so please check it out. And I also did put a few other articles that were popular that I'll note briefly that might be of interest. And, some of the themes I'm going to be talking about are the importance of, having a pay program, and then the other core piece that goes with that is being transparent with your pay programs and being able to communicate that, which is especially important with millennials. And so there's a piece on that there, as well as I also did a piece on job levels and job families. And as I'll mention here shortly, just some kind of common issues and problems I see with, kind of a little bit of garbage in, garbage out with, even if you're benchmarking and how salary structures, I oftentimes find that the titles and levels are off. So some things to consider there as well. But, ultimately what we're all trying to do in this kind of crazy valley is, hopefully bring, more stable and cohesive workforce, improve morale, greater loyalty, stronger internal relationships, and more of a harmonious, meaningful work-life experience versus the contrast of that being, kind of everybody just flying at the seat of their pants, and they're not getting their needs met, and they're badge flipping every year, and as the HR leaders with hiring targets and business objectives, it can be very challenging to keep that stable workforce and have morale that, basically, when you're having key employees leave and for better opportunities, I think it kind of continues to beat that drum that, hey, this employer may not have their stuff together, or they might not have my best the best intentions for me in mind. So it could be kind of a constant reminder, and it can really put, as employers, it can put you in kind of that downward spiral, which can be very challenging as you're continuing to try to hire and the employees that are left there remaining aren't, maybe as engaged, and maybe have more work to do. So it's just a really negative dynamic. So one question that I'd like to just get a quick show of hands if I could, but I want to hear a little bit more about, does your company have a current compensation plan? And if you don't mind quickly clicking on a box of yes, no, or sort of, giving you a little wiggle room there. And it should say current. So hopefully it's, somewhat been updated in the last year or two or so is what I would kind of say about what current means. But if you can please take a quick moment and just quickly check a box. This is obviously confidential, so nothing surprising particularly, but if you can go ahead and do that, that would be great. And so here are the results. So it looks like about 60% of you do. None of you actually have no plan, and some are kind of in that 40% space. So actually, I'm just about to write another article. I saw another piece, and it seems maybe a little misguided, but they were actually saying that only 40% of companies have compensation plans. So yeah, it looks like you guys are a little bit above that, which is great. And as you know, as HR leaders, you better have some kind of plan in place, or it can really make your challenging roles that much more difficult. Another thing I want to mention is we do engage clients kind of across the board. I think this might be slightly tailored towards our typical customer, which is, when it comes to designing comp plans and salary structures, it's kind of the more than 50 to 500 employees, pre-IPO, private companies. Obviously, public companies will have a compensation staff, so we might get involved more on career pathing and job classification studies and other areas, but typically not in designing actual pay programs. So please keep that in mind. But I still think that a lot of these themes and ideas I think are universally important. And again, there's a wide variety of employers within Silicon Valley, and I know some of you are outside of the Silicon Valley, but it can really shape your employee experience. How many employees you have? Are you actively hiring? What's your competition look like? How are you positioned to compete with them? Do you have the the same funds or not, and how are you doing kind of right now as far as employee engagement? How do you know that? There's a lot of decisions I'm guessing that you guys struggle with on a daily basis, but this can be again, there's a lot of moving pieces to people programs, and there's a lot to track, and so these things I think are pretty important in kind of determining kind of where you may even start. And as I mentioned, I think there's a lot of unique challenges to different organizations when it comes to the talent and the infrastructure that you have, the resources you have, and the work environment. And when we're talking about 60-70% of jobs in finance and IT and legal and engineering, there's really, you don't, when it comes to benchmarking and your peer competitors, you really have to kind of look around and see that, there's a lot of tech and there's a lot of healthcare and there's nonprofits and there's private. So even if you're a private or a nonprofit, you still really need to kind of think of the big picture and the employability of your employees and the skill sets that they can offer. And to get into some of what I see, and maybe some of this may or may not resonate with you, but kind of the common issues that I see when we're engaging with our clients or our prospects is some of the themes. But continuity of HR leadership and other management. I know, especially in larger organizations, it can be a little bit of a revolving door in some cases, and there could be some grandiose plans and initiatives that might take shape and then might not be completed. So there could be kind of some fragmented different directions that go on. Again, Silicon Valley is very competitive, and there's always a better opportunity. Next door and HR, I think, has I think they're just pretty employable by having exposure to past employers and things like that. So there could be a little bit of disjointed kind of programs. As I mentioned, the job levels and titles. This seems to be kind of a universal problem wherever I go. Maybe if you're a smaller organization, it might be a little bit more streamlined, or if you have more built-out job families around particular job families. But I'm constantly seeing issues with the job levels and titles, which is really the foundation of your pay programs when it comes to job descriptions and benchmarking. But I think it's just kind of in the course of doing business, there's mergers, acquisitions, transfers, reorgs, new leadership, and we oftentimes see this kind of go sideways. Another common thing is different styles of managers, whether they're hiring managers or managers during a transfer. They might be more conservative or aggressive with kind of how they're positioning pay and salary grades and titles. So if you're not looking at that every couple of years, again, you could be kind of in that garbage in, garbage out kind of quagmire. And job descriptions is another big one. They're just they're kind of not a top priority by any means, but again, if they're not being updated every so often, they're really foundational to make sure you have solid benchmarks, and obviously helpful for recruiting. And the other piece that is a really important theme in this presentation, especially on the latest trends, is the career pathing and learning and development opportunities. And it can be very challenging for a company to kind of say, hey, we care about your career growth and your opportunities, and then they post something and they can't tell the employee whether it's a promotion or not, or they can't tell them how what skills they'll need to to qualify, or what skills they can work on growing to get there. And if you don't have job descriptions, you're really not going to have that line of sight. So again, nothing overly fun or fancy about them, but critical nonetheless. Especially, I think some of my, again, that 50 to 500 employee, I think The survey data can be a challenge. Can be kind of cost prohibitive. They might have to buy multiple surveys. They might get good benchmarks, and then they might not know exactly what to do with them because, kind of putting together compensation programs is definitely an art science blend, and you can only get you have great survey benchmarks, but if you don't have experience on how you can kind of piece those together and design those programs, it could be kind of challenging, and it could really depend on the company too. So even if you've done 2 or 3, you could still be at your next opportunity could be much different. So I think it could be kind of challenging and on the expertise side, and then there's the bandwidth piece, which is obviously something you guys know all about with all the plates that you're spinning, and then just the priority levels with competing programs are, just taking the time to say, okay, let's stop the bleeding, stop sleeping with one eye open. Let's actually look at our job levels. Let's refresh our benchmarks. Let's, adjust our salary structures. Let's clean up this one-off issue here. So I think those are another ones that could be kind of prohibitive. Get into some high-level trends in Silicon Valley, just to kind of, maybe hit on some things that you already know, but some voluntary turnover. There's a lot of hiring going on, and aggressive hiring. Salary budgets are pretty similar. Bonus incentive budgets are somewhat similar, and long-term incentives, which is for public companies. I think there's maybe a third of the attendees are in public companies right now. So just some high-level pieces. I think the other kind of trend that's happening here in Silicon Valley and everywhere is the generational shift in the workforce with, each generation influencing the workforce, and each generation kind of less and less loyal, shorter tenure, and I think it's very disruptive to the market, and it's much more employee-centric, which is, a big paradigm shift. There's a lot of kind of negativity around millennials about how they're kind of flaky, and they're not committed, and they want it all, and it's kind of partly true and partly not. They're just coming from a new generation. They really want a great employee experience. They want learning and development opportunities. They do want to be promoted every 6 months. So it creates a lot of challenges with the current old school thinking when it comes to compensation planning. And the other big piece is they kind of want constant feedback. The old school management approach of, you have the discussion once a year is just not going to cut it. They really need kind of more immediate feedback and want to be more part of the discussion. And again, I think the employee transparency is also another piece that they kind of demand. They don't want to be, told that, we can talk about it in 6 months, or we're not really sure if that's a promotion or not, or what the salary range is. If that's not kind of established, I think it could really affect their loyalty. And I think that some of the latest trends with millennials is they're leaving they're finding new opportunities every 1.8 years. So it could be incredibly disruptive to a business to hire them and recruit them and train them and get them up to speed and get them functioning, at full capacity, and then having them walk out the door. So it could be a very costly proposition, and I'm sure a lot of you know the expenses and the time of managers to interview and the productivity loss by losing good talent. So, I do think it's putting a lot of additional strain on current HR programs. Across the generations, there are some common themes, and these ones always kind of percolate up to the top, even though there's different preferences of the generations. But career development and learning opportunities, the firm's reputation and pay are obviously critical. And I think one thing I'd like to echo is, obviously you can't pay top dollar in Silicon Valley, and, unless you're the Apples or the Facebooks or the Googles, but, you can have hopefully something that's within a competitive range, and then you could really build on these other programs and to hopefully make more of a meaningful experience and provide those learning and development opportunities and work on being able to communicate it and be transparent and have that kind of experience that increases your firm's reputation. And of course, the contrast to that is not being transparent and having these inequities and having these I wouldn't say bad apples, but these people that are actively disengaged and which can really do a lot of damage both to your brand and to the folks that reside there. You could really kind of get in a negative spiral there. Another concept that I wanted to speak to is, you're always hearing about, merit budgets and, pay for performance and how do you differentiate rewards. And, I see employers struggle with this a lot. And you can see here that, salary budgets, annual salary budgets are typically, 3 to 4% or something like that. And there's really just not a great way that you can take 3 or 4% and really give your key contributors and top performers, really large, meaningful bumps while still trying to give everyone else something, whether it's a cost of living adjustment or something like that. So I think that's certainly a problem. And again, if you haven't done a study in a while and you've kind of taken a fresh look at it, you're going to probably certainly find people that are, that aren't great contributors, that are paid high, that you really can't do anything with. You just have to keep them there as is. You can not give them much of an increase, but that's really not going to give you too much bandwidth there. And then you're going to have key contributors that are low to range and or position to market that you'll need to make some significant adjustments. So, finding a few of those can really eat into your budget. So it's a real challenge to get too strategic and dynamic with a focal plan. And so, with the bonus programs, typically they have a much higher percentage of potential earnings when it comes to those opportunities. And it's also, I think, a bigger opportunity to align behaviors and performance with corporate objectives, which again would require you to define those and communicate those and hopefully make them easy to understand. And you will have a better total cash compensation position of, inclusive of base and bonus, but with top performers and key contributors, if you can get them those 10 or 12% rewards versus a 3 to 5%, adjustment, that's a good opportunity to think about. So if you do have those dated bonus plans that are kind of an entitlement program or just not meaningful or haven't been communicated lately or revised to meet your current business challenges, I certainly encourage you to look into that as you can to really try to better distinguish reward opportunities by performance. A good compensation plan is, you're going to have a strategy, a clearly defined comp strategy. You need to understand your peer companies. You need to have common job levels benchmarked to survey data. Hopefully those job levels are clean. And a base salary program where you're adjusting pay, kind of annually. I know some companies, they can go 3 or 4 years without doing that. Not so much now, but that certainly happens. So you need to know your position, and you need to work towards, kind of working towards your stated total compensation strategy, and hopefully delivering on that and having that beacon of something that you're going towards. As again, you can't solve all your problems in one day. It's going to be an iterative process, but you need to kind of make some inroads there. It's really important to have a variable comp program, line of sight to goals, long-term incentive programs, and clear communication. And of course, it's all the obvious or the obvious and the not so obvious piece is it's really difficult for you to kind of formulate and have that total compensation strategy unless you know how competitive you are when it comes to base, bonus, and for some of you stock. If you don't know your position, it's really difficult for you to bolt on a methodology to that, because maybe you're actually paying above market for base and your bonus is really low. And so it's all, you have what you have, but without reviewing your competitive market position, it can be difficult to kind of shape that. So you might say, oh, we're high in base. We want to move towards more of a pay for performance. So we might really kind of switch to kind of more of a cost of living adjustment on the focal and really start investing in this, kind of total cash compensation position, which would be more inclusive of bonus opportunities, and then communicating on that and looking at your workforce and identifying what's meaningful to them, whether it's learning and development or activities or other contributions to the community, different ways to kind of engage and make employees feel good about where they're working. And what a comp plan can do is help management make more informed decisions, hopefully more consistently, and hopefully a lot faster. I work with small companies all the time that it's just a very cumbersome process, and it really becomes this game of the candidate wants this, the hiring manager thinks that, HR is looking at the folks that they have in-house and what they're being paid, and it becomes kind of a shouting match between who actually gets what, and it could be very challenging, and the outcomes of that could be a very choppy, fragmented system that you just kind of need to continue to deal with in the oncoming years. Where if you egregiously overpaid for somebody that actually doesn't wind up being that good, they're going to be kind of eating into your budgets and really demotivating your employees that are there and doing a great job. So without having a structure in place, it could be incredibly challenging to mitigate those conversations. And it's not a silver bullet by any means, but it can influence engagement and job satisfaction and culture. Helping align business behaviors with business objectives and mission, and give you space to cultivate relationships, camaraderie, and connectedness, hopefully by keeping people there long enough to kind of get to know one another and get to know the company and hopefully stick around. And if it can't deliver all those things, at minimum, at least you could do is really lessen those obstacles to engagement and those that are actively disengaged, those bad apples that are creating a lot of problems. So even if you can't do it all, if you can at least kind of true up some of your issues and have work towards a system. And employees are, I think, somewhat forgiving if you say, hey, we're going to look at refreshing our comp studies, our compensation systems, and work to better meet the needs of our employees. And you're going to buy yourself some time, and as long as you kind of continue to look into those programs and communicate it and ask the employees what's meaningful, I do think that you will get a little bit of time to formulate that, and you will have the goodwill there. But I know a lot of companies where employees have been promised things, and again, it might have been one of those HR leaders that was there and then they left, and so being in HR can be challenging because sometimes the predecessors have set expectations or have not accomplished what they set out to do, and that can make your job's a little harder. So it's something that you need to continue to work on and work through, and hopefully that will help get a greater connection to the company, and hopefully create a more stable and cohesive environment. Here's some talent management priorities. I'm by no means a talent management expert, but I wanted to include some of these to just kind of review and something that you can think of as far as what you're hopefully trying to accomplish through your talent acquisition and your compensation programs and your other perks. And to kind of summarize my broad-based discussion on compensation is, talent war is very, very red hot. It's really important to know how you stack up against your competition, how you're doing from a base, bonus, equity level, perks, L&D budgets. All those things can really make a big difference on you formulating your communication strategy. So you can speak to that both internally as well as externally to potential candidates. And so you don't necessarily have to be the top dog, but I do think it's important that you have some awareness there that can kind of help shape your systems and figure out where you may invest in and where you may divest in, because obviously you can't have everything. And it's also, I think, could help you figure out what makes you different, and how you can kind of play with that, and how you can communicate that to employees, so employees know that as some differentiators, and hopefully give you the opportunity to better connect and support one another. So that is kind of broad-based compensation. And I also wanted to speak with you a bit about executive compensation, because I also see this as oftentimes the kind of the most neglected area of compensation for private companies. And I apologize if you're a public company. I think that's kind of a whole different system. And pre-IPO companies, they'll at least have stock, and so they'll kind of have that component. But especially when we're working with private companies, public-owned companies, services companies, there can be a big disconnect here, and oftentimes it's heavily neglected. So I think when we think of executive compensation, we kind of have these visions of the Tyco and Enron execs, and these crazy compensation plans not delivering, and having these golden parachutes, and tremendously overpaid for not delivering results. And but I'm not seeing this at all when I'm working with my small and mid-sized businesses. Again, I think it's one of the most neglected areas, and I think there's some reasons for that I'll get into. But a lot of the executive compensation plans that I see when I get to these companies are look like they were designed back when Mr. T and Madonna were cool, and so they've been around for 5 or 6 years. They haven't been looked at. They've been kind of arbitrarily, these executive compensation has been kind of arbitrarily set, maybe by an owner or a founder, and they haven't been reviewed. It can be oftentimes their bonus programs, again, are entitlement programs, or they haven't been recalibrated to market, and making sure that they have a meaningful program. And oftentimes when we're engaging with these companies, they kind of look more like the Plan A, where it's mostly base, it's some bonus, and there's probably not a long-term incentive component, and so it's really heavily weighted on fixed costs, and there's really not a lot of skin in the game for the executive on whether they do great or not. Again, oftentimes the bonus plans are quite dated. They haven't been updated to fit the recent challenges of the business, and so what we oftentimes try to do is we kind of try to divest out of those fixed costs and try to shift those expenses to more of the pay for performance programs from both a short-term and long-term incentive standpoint. And I know private companies can have challenges around the LTI component, but we're dealing with key leadership that are, have significant tribal knowledge, that have great relationships with some of the clients and suppliers, and I've personally been a part of studies where with an executive leaving, 40% of the business is walked out the door. So I do think it's really important that these private companies think of some kind of levers to not only pay them in the short term, but also think of those long-term incentive opportunities. There's phantom stock, there's employee stock ownership programs available. So there are different kind of vehicles for that, or even kind of cash equivalent programs. But we do like to see kind of an overall kind of both short and long-term incentive, because we have seen firsthand how disruptive it can be to the company. And when it comes to kind of a bonus pool calculation, typically when it comes to executives, they're not going to have 5 or 10 different areas that they're going to be, rated against. It's really going to be about a lot of the core metrics of the company, whether that's, top line growth or bottom line revenue, or, kind of things that they can impact, and less about, their personal skills and maybe even team ethic. It's really driven by numbers. And here's an example of, kind of a balanced approach on what we see with some bonus pools. And it's important to have kind of escalators, and if company objectives are exceeded dramatically, again, it is a pay for performance plan. So if your executives can hit it out of the park, the plan will certainly help fund any additional compensation that they would receive, because at the end of the day, a lot of the executives do have a tremendous impact on whether the organization kind of meets their objectives or not. So we like to kind of try to, similar with the broad-based compensation, make sure that there's a program that's updated and refreshed and clear and aligns with your business objectives. And here's an example of a long-term incentive example where there might be this isn't the standard public company stock where you invest over 4 years, but this is an example of some programs we've designed where the executive is getting graded on a performance year here, and then they'll have an amount that will vest over time. So it's not a short-term component, but it's a long-term component. And you get to year 2018, and the executives could risk losing a lot of money on the table. So you do want to kind of design those programs that will make it kind of very difficult and painful for those key leaders to leave, if they were to leave at any time, versus only having a base and bonus program where they could leave any quarter, or they could leave maybe biannually pretty easily with not a lot of regret necessarily. And kind of signs of possible issues with executive compensation that oftentimes we're called in is loss of key leaders or not able to fill a vacant executive role. Kind of having those leaders with significant tribal knowledge and deep client or vendor relationships. For my earlier example, an agency exec that lost 40% of his business that had he had a big ego, he had a big successful company, and he thought he could set the ranges, he thought he knew what he was doing, and unfortunately, this stuff isn't necessarily intuitive. So it's really important to kind of make sure that you're proactive with your executives, because it could really negatively impact the business. And similar to Broadbased, that could also really affect employee morale, especially if they're a well-liked executive. Family-owned companies, I think we oftentimes see this, this unwillingness to, I think it could be a little awkward, but oftentimes, this executive compensation isn't addressed. It's not adjusted. These owners are worried about their employees and about their business and about their clients, and oftentimes this is their own executives are neglected and to the detriment of the company. And the more you can measure performance and fund that, I think the better performing your company will be. And another one is companies that have owners that aren't actively involved in with the business. I think oftentimes, again, they can kind of set it and forget it, and they're kind of looking at high-level dashboards, but they might not be taking a closer look at the current executive packages. And another thing that comes up is the succession planning and issues. Is baby boomers are aging. They have a lot of businesses, and how do you plan for that? And oftentimes that will force you to kind of take a fresh look at your current programs. And again, companies that haven't reviewed their executive compensation programs in 5+ years, again, these programs, their bonus programs can be based off of old metrics that aren't even valid anymore, or if they haven't been reviewed, again, they're just becoming an entitlement program. So it's a lost opportunity to influence behaviors and company objectives and results. So these are items that I would kind of warning signs where you might want to ask and look into in more detail. So I was able to get in a bit about broad-based compensation, typically for kind of that 50 to 500 employee space, as well as speak to what I'm seeing with some of the challenges with executive compensation on those private companies. And so, thank you. I'd love to hear more about the challenges that you see and any questions that you have, and any other ideas on how we might be able to make things better.
Yeah, thank you so much. You covered a lot of material today, and I know that this could have been a half-day or a full-day seminar diving deep into each of those topics. I know I had several times thought of areas that I wish you could have gone more into. We have questions that came in. I encourage everyone, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A box on your screen. Just type in your question, hit submit, and we're going to get to as many as we can. Just to confirm, there are a couple that are related here. How often are you recommending that companies review or revise their compensation plans?
Great question. I think it really depends on, it does kind of depend on the organization and their size, but I think the primary driver is the quality of their current existing program. As HR leaders, do you feel good about it? Has it been, when it was updated, was it, did you really roll up your sleeve? Did you move some people around? Did you, with the employee mapping, did you update titles and levels? Did you update benchmarks? Did you update your salary structures? Did you actually start with a clean slate? Or was it a more of a cursory kind of, okay, we refreshed our salary structures, but it was all based off of old data, and we didn't engage any managers and validate, that the organization and titles and levels had shifted. If that's the case, then I think it's definitely not going to sustain very long at all, and something that should probably be looked at sooner than later. And I know that it can be a real challenge to get to these more in-depth studies, but I do think it's really important, and it lends itself well to project-based engagements, and that's exactly what we do. So we can kind of help facilitate that process to make it more of a lot less painful for organizations.
You mentioned during the session that it was like every couple years. So it's not that we have to necessarily, if we're doing a good job and reviewing everything, that we have to do it every year, but at least every 2 years,
Yeah, so I would say if you do have confidence in your programs and systems, then yeah, I think as far as actually updating and shifting salary structures and things like that, I think that can be done every year or two, and I do think they sustain. And I would say probably by after year 3, the market dynamics and everything has shifted, and that's when you'd want to do more of a deep dive. But if you have a good system in place, they will sustain, a year or 2 with just some minor kind of adjustments.
And obviously it ties, because you and I have talked about this, it depends on how quickly the company is growing. Because if you have a company that is growing and jobs are changing, and I mean that would require more attention on a more frequent basis than maybe some of the more mature companies who haven't necessarily changed their jobs, their roles, or their staff. Would you agree?
That's great point. Yeah. Great point. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, because as I mentioned, if you're one of those high-flying companies, or if you've had a spinoff or a merger, those are really disruptive events that can really kind of, drive your program sideways. So yeah, that's something I should have mentioned. So yeah, I'm just talking kind of generally speaking if you're kind of just plodding along. But yeah, if you're growing quickly like that, or constricting quickly, then that's going to put a lot more wear and tear on your programs. That's for sure.
You mentioned the benchmarking. A question here is, PayScale is one of the most affordable resources for salary information. Do you have an opinion on whether it is a viable resource to use? And do you have a salary benchmark resource you recommend?
Yes. I do have an opinion. It's based on I just kind of eyeballed a few jobs in the tool as I was demoing it, and my opinion, that isn't based off of a large quantity of science, but my opinion for Bay Area companies, especially in tech, it seemed quite watered down and not very meaningful. I also found it difficult / a little clunky. They'll ask you 10 or 12 different, you can filter it like 10 or 12 different ways on years experience and education, and on and on and on and on. And I didn't really even notice that big of a shift in
the results.
The results. And I think it's almost like I said, I almost just like to keep it simpler with better data points, and then you can kind of slot in and not. I found that piece a little cumbersome. But yeah, survey data is very challenging, and there's stuff on Glassdoor, and it can be very subjective. It's not as filtered. So often, and I know Radford is probably the best source in the Bay Area. It could certainly be cost prohibitive. But that's obviously a pretty robust data set there. Comp Analyst is another one. And obviously, if you're in different industries, there's different ones for executives and for healthcare, et cetera.
Yeah. And I know that I have heard the biggest complaint being the cost of accessing some of the larger ones for the smaller clients. They don't want to spend, thousands of dollars that could be going to employees on the data survey, and yet it's, which comes first, the chicken or the egg, because you don't necessarily, if you don't have good benchmarking data, you're not sure where you are compared to your competitors. So it's a tough one.
Yeah. It really is unfortunate, because you're absolutely right. You can pay, $5, $7, $10 just to get data for a couple different data sets, and then you're still kind of stuck with how are you going to bolt this down to your system. And again, it can be very challenging to do that if you haven't had experience with that. So you spend all this money on the raw data, but nothing on the design, and the design can be a little difficult to administer. So I do think that there's certainly some big challenges and barriers to entry there that I think are unfortunate.
Well, yeah, and that's why you have a whole business around this. So the next question that kind of ties to this was, do you have some key tips to share on what we should do when we roll out a new or revised comp plan? I thought that was a good question. Are there certain things that when, if someone's just tweaking out if we're looking at these every couple of years, we're rolling them out as HR practitioners, do we just attach a letter and send it out? Do we, make sure the president comes out and talks to it? Do you have any tips?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really boils down to how good you feel about your plan, and what did you do? Did you roll up your sleeves and really kind of reset the foundation and kind of refresh your data and kind of accommodate all those updates that occurred, or was it more of just a cursory? We just changed our VLOOKUPs and we updated our market pricing and structures and didn't even really look at anything else. And so, if you're a smaller, like pre-IPO company, for example, I think an actual example might be that, hey, we're engaging in this initiative, or we're engaging with this third party to validate our position in the market, and we're excited to share with you the results as we know. And again, companies aren't going to be transparent, and they're not going to be communicating this if they haven't done that and they don't feel good about the results, because employees are going to be able to poke holes in them very quickly about inequities and inability to recognize whether there's promotions or opportunities for improvement. So I do think that it's important that you that's factored in. But I think it really depends on how hands-on the process was, and there's always the balancing act of not opening up the kimono all the way, so to speak. You can't share everything, but just being forthcoming. And I'm by no means a communications expert, especially in larger companies that have staff for that. But yeah, I think just you'll get a lot of credibility by communicating that we've looked at this, we found our position, we want it. We encourage what's meaningful to you to ensure that, because you can't spend money on 10 different programs, so help us help you, and then kind of tie that together in a meaningful kind of cohesive statement.
Great. This is a little bit of a different topic. We have a large percentage of our workforce that is hourly non-exempt. We don't currently have them on a bonus plan. Our feedback is that they want as high an hourly rate as possible. Do you believe that even hourly employees are motivated by bonuses and we should look at restructuring? That might be a tough
absolutely.
one. I mean, one, you'd have to know more about the company, but maybe speaking to it in a more broad sense.
I mean, in theory, the mechanics of a bonus plan, provided it was easy to understand and it was balanced and it's something that these employees could actually impact. I think there's a great opportunity to kind of watch the fixed costs and really kind of look at the business and what these folks are doing and how they can increase their contribution level to impact the bottom line. And I think whatever, if they're all non-exempt and they're in production or something like that, it also might be another avenue to be creative and have some more fun with other team-based incentives and things like that. So I certainly think that there's opportunity for all. It just requires the company to really know their business and know the bottom line numbers of how increased productivity or increased customer service level will kind of help pay for that, pay for performance incentive component. And I think if it's done right, I think it could certainly be incredibly meaningful to them.
Yeah. I know there's a lot of companies
I'm not an employment attorney though, and I'm not sure how that would. There could be some FLSA implications there, so that's another consideration. So as far as that, it might have to be in a different form, like a spot bonus or something like that, or more of a team-based metric. But that's something that you need
how it's defined as to
yes.
Yeah, when the bonuses are earned and all of that is very important. I have time for just one more question. We have some highly valued employees who are brought in at a higher rate than our current pay range. We are not planning on changing that. In this situation, do you have suggestions to help us reduce potential problems over time? For example, different job title or paying out more in bonus versus salary. I get it. So, and you spoke to that you're going to bring in potentially there's outliers that come in because you really want to have an employee that you're going to employ that's outside the current range, or you want to keep someone so you're going outside your range. How do you try and address that if you can't say, well, we're just going to modify the range and potentially pay everyone more?
Yeah, I think I kind of understand the question, but yeah, that's just kind of the nature of the beast is, yeah, you're going to be in that situation where you just have to have that talent, or just, the lines have shifted, and yeah, anybody that's still sitting in the chair after 2 years, the marketability is just much more aggressive, and so you need to go there to meet the talent. And I think the best way to mitigate that is just making sure that you have updated compensation plans that are competitive, and that you have a base and you have these other perks, and you're having these conversations, and you're as transparent as you can be. But that's the realities of business. I mean, there's going to be these key and critical skill sets that are going to need to be paid more than others, and there's the realities of, hopefully they're good, but we just have to pay them more because we need to get somebody in the door, and we're just keep on whiffing on the talent. So hopefully you have a solid enough infrastructure, and you're not making these egregious mistakes willy-nilly, but it's kind of business case driven to kind of mitigate any other negative chatter or inequities that might exist. But that's kind of the realities of the business.
Great. Well, Clifford, we are out of time for today, and I want to thank you again so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. Hopefully I was somewhat informative and not too dull. It's a little weird talking to yourself in the room.
I know we have.
I was able to get some of your questions answered, and I really appreciate it. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to listen, and hope that was valuable. Thank you.
Great. Well, I want to thank everyone today for joining us. We look forward to seeing you online at future webinars, and hope you've had a great day. Thanks.
Take care.